This is Jocko Podcast number 32 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. And since Jocko Podcast number 31 went long with the very heavy and dark book, we decided to end that one and not do any Q&A. Which means that today we have 100% Q&A for the troops. And obviously the questions come from you all that are listening, mostly on Twitter and on Facebook is where I get these questions from. So thanks to everyone for submitting these questions so that we can answer them for you. Echo, good evening.
Good evening. All right. First question. I want to say I like this first question a lot.
It's a good question.
Yeah. Anyway.
Echo approves of the first question.
I approve of most questions for sure. Okay. First question. How does one who grew up in the ghetto, quote unquote, involved with gangs, drugs, witnessing murders, and all that good stuff, overcome that mentality where your guard is always up? Coming from a family of immigrants and growing up really poor, we had to make a lot of sacrifices. And as I get older, I feel that in some ways, this affects my daily life. I'm proud of my beginnings and I cherish my mistakes, but still, even in my senior year in college, I feel some resentment towards these privileged kids who seem like they have it all. I really find it hard to get along with them because in a way I see them as weak because they haven't suffered through hard times or have to struggle as a minority. What should I do to learn to love them and respect them as equals?
Yeah, that is a good question. I definitely have seen people go through that mentality.
Yeah.
Where they're having that attitude. And I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I had a girlfriend when I was a kid, this girl, and her friend was my friend as well. So we were all kind of friends. Sure. And one of the things that she said, which I thought was brilliant, and she said, everybody has a hard luck story. Mm-hmm. Like no matter, you go and talk to somebody, they had their struggle that they went through. And whether it was divorce, whether it was abuse, whether it was money struggles, whether there was fighting in the house, whether it was jail, whether there's drugs, whether it was alcoholic or workaholic or whatever situation you've been in, everybody's got a hard luck story or something that challenged them. And it might not be really obvious on the surface. I mean, for instance, this question here, the way that the question is phrased, you can hear he's talking about the things that he said, family of immigrants growing up really poor, we had to make a lot of sacrifices, mm-hmm. right? So right there, you can see that he's got a certain amount of familial pride. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about his family as we and a group of being together. And, that might not be money. That might not be expensive clothes. But that's an incredibly powerful thing. You're incredibly lucky to have that. Yep. Now you tell me who has a tougher challenge? The person that grows up in a tight-knit family where everyone sticks together and everyone makes sacrifices together, or the kid who grows up whose dad makes a ton of money, dad's never home. Dad literally chooses work over the family. And how does that affect the kid's personality? The kids can come from any background and end up in really tough situations with drugs, alcohol, addiction, whatever, that came from really good circumstances or really bad circumstances. It doesn't even matter. You can come from both. So that's part one. Part one is you don't know what kind of struggles other people have been through. They might be a 22-year-old senior in college driving a BMW that has more demons in their life than you do. So it's a little bit arrogant to walk around and think that your demons are worse than anybody else's demons. Right. You just don't know what their demons are. Now, on top of that, if you just want to look at like the privilege, the monetary side of it, I promise you that despite the fact that you grew up in a ghetto and your family had to make sacrifices, there are people that you're the privileged kid. Because you get some kid that grew up in South America or some kid that grew up in Africa that, you think you had it tough. They didn't have a house. They got, political strife in their city. They watched their parents get killed, whatever. So you're a privileged person to somebody else. So let's keep that in mind as well. And once again, you don't know what that looks like. You don't know what kind of struggles people have been through. So let's just try and, I'll use the term judge. Let's try and judge people not on what they are, but on who they are as a person. And, for me, you talked about the minority thing. To me, I don't care about race, color, creed. None of that stuff matters to me. I don't care about socioeconomic background. None of that stuff matters to me. I don't judge you on that. You know why? Because in the military, in the SEAL teams, the good SEALs came from every background. Every one of those backgrounds. The bad SEALs came from every one of those backgrounds. There was kids that grew up rich with a silver spoon in their mouth. They were awesome SEALs. There were kids that grew up in the ghetto and their parents were gangbangers. Awesome SEALs. Same as reverse is true. There was kids that grew up with a silver spoon in their mouth and went to a private school and they were horrible SEALs. And there was kids that grew up gangbangers and they were horrible SEALs. So it doesn't matter. What matters is not what you are, it's who you are as a person. So I'm not gonna judge. And in fact, if I was to name some negative traits that do bother me, it's one of them would be judging people based on stereotypes, judging the book by its cover. If you're doing that, that's a negative. That is a weakness. So just check yourself and realize that you don't know what people's backgrounds are. You don't know what goes on behind closed doors. You don't know what tough situation people have been through, and judge them not based on that stuff. Just judge them on who they are as a person.
Yeah, fully. And I think this kind of helps. You know how, let's say you're in a boat, right? Like a rowboat, and you're all trying to get upstream, and you have all different kinds of people, and then you have weaker people and you have stronger people, and the strong person, whether it's by his choice or not, he's strong. He can, he's been working out. I don't know. He's in shape. He can row a lot. So he went through all this sacrifice, but at the end, he's a stronger person. So you can look at it in a way where you now have the power. So be responsible with your power, like to help. So you have to row. It's like you have a bigger burden, but you have to embrace that, not burden, but you have a bigger workload because you're more prepared for it in life.
Yeah. And actually speaking of that, so now that means that you have the power to give people knowledge and perspective on what you've been through. And that's important. Now there's two ways to do that. We talk about this all the time. If I go up to you, Echo, and I say, hey, you don't know what you're doing. Let me show you the correct way to film this. Let me show you the correct way to use this microphone. Right? How would you feel about that?
I don't know if I would like that.
No, of course you wouldn't. If I came up to you and said, listen, you don't know what it's like to struggle. Are you going to be open to hear what I'm about to say?
Yeah.
No, you're not. No one is.
Yeah.
No one is. But if I said, hey, man, it's really good to meet you. Oh, and then we start to develop a relationship. But it's one thing that we got to remember is what it's like for maybe some people, when I was growing up, I had to deal with this. Oh, okay. Now your mind is open to it. You start learning. You start growing yourself. So by not being arrogant and by being humble and thinking that you may have been through worse things than me or whatever the case may be, we're actually going to make each other better. And that's the goal here.
Yeah.
So you just got to stay humble on these things, and it'll work out better for you in the end. It will absolutely work out better for you in the end.
Yeah.
Judge people by the content of their character, I believe, is a way of putting it that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep.